Hey everybody, welcome back to James Draws Everything, continuing drawing every country in the world's flag. That's right, every country, every single one. Big countries, small countries, fat countries, skinny countries. Looking at you, Chile. Drawing all sorts of flags, boring flags, interesting flags, square flags, rectangle flags, triangle flags. Looking at you, Nepal. And flags from every single continent, and a lot of these flags are going to be in the continent of Africa, which we're going to be going back to today just because there's so many countries there. There's over 50 of them. So going into Africa today, doing one of the big ones, kind of one of the heavy hitters of Africa. We're going to be doing Kenya. So Kenya kind of sits right over here south of Ethiopia, and kind of one of the oldest civilizations in the world. You go way back to like some very early Neolithic peoples when you're talking about Kenya. So rich history there. It's on a lot of important trade routes in Africa, and it has a pretty interesting colonial history. So we'll go through all of that, and I also like the flag, right? So we did. What was it? I think it was, it was Eswatini. We did Eswatini already, and when I talked about Eswatini, I mentioned how, if you talk to somebody, man on the street, doesn't know anything about flags, you just ask them, describe an African flag. And they would probably describe something like the Eswatini flag, like I mentioned in that episode, and they probably also describe something like this Kenya flag, right? So this Kenya flag just kind of reminds you of Africa when you look at it. So we'll get into all of that. It is one that I like, and it's not a Pan-African flag, right? We got a lot of those red, yellow, green flags on this page. So Pan-Africanism, not a part of the Kenya flag, not a part of that design, and still haven't done Ethiopia yet, but I promise whenever we get to Ethiopia, I will explain what Pan-Africanism is and why so many of those flags look like that. But Kenya, we're not talking about Ethiopia today, we're talking about Kenya. So, very early center of trade. So it attracted a lot of Chinese, Indians, people from Indonesia, the Middle East, North Africa. So it was a hub pretty early on. And then kind of like around the 9th and 10th century, you got a big mix of people there, right? So you got Africans, Arabs, Persians. So they all kind of mixed together, and that sort of became what we know as the Swahili people. So the people of the coast, Swahili, and they have a distinct language, the Kiswahili, and culture. So Swahili and Kenya kind of synonymous, right? It is sort of one of those kind of like melting pot sort of cultures. And then with this being such an important trade route, trade hub, who's going to be knocking on the door, right? The Europeans, those pesky Europeans coming to colonize things. And the first ones are the Portuguese, right? So the Portuguese show up in the 1490s, right? So this is kind of at the height of the age of exploration. And there's a big trade post there. So right, you can't really think of this as like Kenya yet. It's just kind of like like just like one big city that's that they utilize for trade, Mombasa. And the Portuguese look to take that as like their gateway into the Indian Ocean. And they're looking to become number one in trade by monopolizing those Indian Ocean ports. But the Portuguese, they don't stay there. They're kind of pushed out in the 1600s by the Oman and Pate. I don't know if it's Pate or Pate people. And then kind of coming in closer to like modern times, Kenya draws the interest of both the Germans and the British, right? So this kind of becomes a colony of both. And then there's also, the borders aren't really set yet as to what they are today. So that includes like parts of present day Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda. In 1895, the British established an East Africa Protectorate. And then in 1920, they convert it into the colony of Kenya. And then there's also kind of something interesting that happens with the Germans there, right? There's this guy kind of leading up to World War I. And he kind of forms like a rebellion against the British and is sort of driven out. But yeah, Germany kind of loses. They don't lose this as like a result of the Treaty of Versailles. They kind of make a deal with the British. So it's mostly the British in this part of the world when you're looking into the 20th century. And then with the British there, you do have some turmoil. There's a Mau Mau uprising. So the Mau Mau people, they start rebelling against British rule in the 50s, which eventually leads to the Declaration of Independence of Kenya in 1963. So Kenya, one of the earlier free African states, and there's a little bit of politicking going on around the independence of Kenya. There's a lot of Somalis there as well that kind of didn't want to be part of Kenya, ethnic Somalis, but that kind of gets shut down in like the British have some say in that, like not really giving them like their own state of that, state like autonomous within Kenya, right? They are part of Kenya proper. So that does lead to some issues. As far as independent Kenya, can't really talk about Kenya without talking about Jomo Kenyatta. He was the founding president, and basically like their George Washington, he kind of led the independence struggle, and pretty much has single party rule until he dies in 1978, and then his vice president takes over. And basically, when the vice president takes over, this party, the KANU party, and that stands for Kenya African National Union, they sort of changed the constitution to make other political parties illegal, right? So free and fair, right? It's got a couple long spears behind the flag here. So let me just kind of concentrate as I draw those. Yeah, so there's a lot of upheaval when KANU takes, basically control of the country. A lot of liberalization movements kind of going back and forth like into the 90s. And then there's a lot of kind of elections that are called into question. A lot of what is believed to be fraud. Keeping this this single party or this single party rule, right? Keeping the KANU in power. So they do have some opposition parties arise, even though political parties are kind of illegal against KANU. And again, you have a lot of different people here, right? It's not just like what you would consider, like for like a nation state. There's a lot of multi-ethnic groups that kind of form coalitions against KANU. And then the NARC, National Rainbow Coalition Party, defeats KANU They defeat actually the first president's son, Uhuru Kenyatta. And yeah, so that happens. So you kind of get your first shift in the political tide in Kenya. And things don't exactly settle down after that. The opposition party kind of plays things a little dirty themselves, and this leads to a lot of widespread violence and rioting and all that. Led to like over 1,000 deaths and displaced a lot of people. So the African Union kind of has to step in there and mediate things. Just got to concentrate on this one too, because yeah, this is one of them flags that's it's got the tricolor design, but it's got those little white separating bars, you know, kind of in between here. So let's just make sure we do those the right way. All right. Yeah, so eventually Uhuru Kenyatta actually does become the president of Kenya. So you've had, you know, Jomo Kenyatta and then his son also become president, and that's, you know, except for a brief switches in the power dynamic that you know, basically that family has ruled this country for pretty much its entire existence. So there was a new constitution that they adopted in 2010. It eliminated the prime minister and tried to add some more checks and balances to the government. And that's the one that Kenyatta won in 2013. His second term, he won in 2017. And then in 2022, a new guy, William Ruto, won a very close election. And it was disputed, but the Kenyan courts upheld it. So, yeah, so that's pretty much the history of Kenya, right? A lot of instability, sort of, right? There's, you know, of course, there's a lot of like several, you know, coup attempts and things like that during those times. But yeah, so it's one of those countries that's got pretty rich history as far as like, you know, their colonization, just how far back they go. And then also like when the British were there. Right, so when you had these Mau Mau uprisings, you had a regiment of troops. These were black African troops, the King's African Rifles, right, the KAR. So they fought with the British against the Mau Mau uprising. So, you know, those a lot of these African independence movements, you know, it's not just black and white. You know, no pun intended. You did have a lot of loyalists that fought on the side of the British. Kind of like the RAR, right? So the Rhodesian African Rifles were a regiment that fought, you know, on the side of Britain against, like, you know, these the liberalization sort of independence movements. So African history, it's always interesting, right? It's always I think it's worth studying just because it's always presented as so cut and dry, right? Like all these people were just, you know, they were colonized for no reason because everyone was so evil, and then they were just all universally fighting for independence, and then it was finally granted, and then everyone lived happily ever after, right? So that's kind of the story that you're fed, but it's, again, much more complicated than that. History is very complicated. And so is this flag. It's kind of giving me some issues here. Yeah, I don't want to swallow up that cool little shield and spear design, so just got to be careful when I'm edging that black around it. And we'll get to the flag in a minute here. It's almost done. Yeah, so right up there with like Ethiopia, Nigeria, of course South Africa and Egypt. It's one of the bigger economies there. It does have fairly modernized cities and stuff, but a lot of the population, especially rural population, they pretty much live in poverty. So it is kind of one of those countries too that does require a lot of foreign aid to keep things running, but it's developing, right? It's actually Africa, I've said many times, place to watch in the 21st century, right? Because you got a lot of foreign interest pouring in, but in different ways, right? Now, as far as like what China's doing in Africa, it's not a continent to sleep on. So it'll be interesting to see what like a 21st century scramble for Africa could look like, right? With all the technology and stuff that's coming into the country, living standards improving, all that good stuff. Okay. All right, so pretty cool flag. Yeah. All right, so what does the flag mean, James? So you got the 3 equal bands here, and this is a Maasai warrior's shield. Warriors, that's pretty cool. Covering 2 cross spears in the center, and then for your colors, your black symbolizes the majority population, right? The black African people. The red, you know what it means. The red means the blood shed in the struggle for freedom. The green stands for the natural wealth, right? The vegetables, the broccoli, the spinach, all that good stuff you got to eat to stay healthy, all that natural wealth. And the white little bars separating those colors, that stands for peace. And the positioning of the shield and the cross spears symbolize the defense of Kenyan freedom. All right, so that is the flag of Kenya. Maasai warrior shield in the middle. Pretty freaking cool. So let me know what you think. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next video.